Way back in the spring of 1990, 10-year-old me was given a $5 allowance. In search of something to spend my money on, I came upon something fantastic at my local convenience store newsstand. It was then that I started a lifelong obsession with the gold standard of sequential art, the comic book. Now, as an old man, I have decided to open up some old boxes and dig into my comic book collection. I decided it's time for me to review and analyze the illustrations and artists that made me comics crazy. What is happening, everybody? It is Chris Crazy House back again for another episode of Chris Crazy House Presents Comics Crazy. And this is the show on my channel where I like to go back in time and look into some comic book nostalgia. And when I originally conceptualized doing this show and doing this type of segment on my YouTube channel, this is one of the particular comic books I was thinking about. This is one of the ones I had in my head saying, hey, you know what? I could do a retro show reviewing old school comics, and I can definitely start pulling out my Thor collection because I have a pretty large Mighty Thor collection, and this is the first one that I ever bought with my own money of the Mighty Thor, issue 416, okay? And it is written by Tom DeFalco. It is drawn by Ron Frenz, the great Ron Frenz, and it is finished by the great Joe Sano. Okay, so the difference is not just inked by Joe Sano. Mostly people would say, okay, that's just, you know, him doing the inks. But when they say finished, what they mean is back in the day, sometimes comic book artists, they didn't have the time because maybe they were working on more than one project at once. They didn't have enough time to do all the finished artwork. So they would kind of lightly draw in how the panels were going to look, and then someone would come in to do the finishes. So they would finish it off for them. You know, a lot of great comic book artists do that. Like I've seen, you know, work by John Buscema that was finished by someone else. Or even, you know, some comic book greats, they started that way. Sometimes they worked under people like Jack Kirby, like finishing their artwork for them because, you know, Jack Kirby was doing like 6 or 7 books at one time every month. So that's what's going on here with this Thor book. And just look at this cover, guys. This cover is amazing. This is Thor in his alien element. So the basics of Thor, as far as the comic books that I've read anyway, is Thor could either be a hero who fights supervillains. He more typically goes back into the mythology of what he is, being a Norse god, and he'll fight other mythological figures like his half-brother Loki, or maybe some of the creatures from mythology, or they can have the space stories. And this is basically a space story, or you can even go as far to say as this cosmic horror, okay? Because it says, you know, the hero and the horror. When I saw this cover, it made me want to pick it up. First of all, just the fact that it's stark red and black, that monochromatic look there, where it's all red, and you can kind of see Thor, who is facing the enemy that's coming towards him. You see the fear in the eyes of the policeman here, and you see someone who's already been a victim of the horror that's coming at them, because this person looks like a zombie. He looks dead already, but just a very stark and extremely contrasted cover that is done here. And I just truly love it. It's one of my favorite books. I'm so glad I still have the original all the way back from the 1990s. And check this out. So I will be looking through this original copy, but I also have a collected version of this book. So you'll be able to see the difference with the colors. The colors are a lot more brighter because this is a reprint. This is the original, so obviously it's going to be faded. Plus, it was printed on newsprint from way back in the 90s, so that was that older method. This has been treated digitally to look different. So let me just give you an example of how the difference is here. So you got that page here, page 3, and then I'll find the same page in this one, and you can see the stark contrast in the colors. Okay, so once again, I had this collected version. I bought this last year. I found it on Amazon, and I had to pick it up because pure nostalgia, but it also has some issues that I missed from back then. So I had to get back in there just so I can get the issues that I missed from the Mighty Thor way back in the 90s. But we're going to start here at the beginning of the hero and the horror. And you got the character of Hercules kind of looking out into the heavens. And you can see that he's worried about something. He says, the stars, they're alive. They're calling to me. And you can, like I said, you can actually see the stars in his eyes. Very interesting way to start out a comic book. But like I said, it has that kind of cosmic horror feel to it. So it fits perfectly. If you think about classic sci-fi or cosmic horror, that's what this exemplifies perfectly. That feeling of dread that's coming towards you from space or from the unknown. It works perfectly here, and it's showcased perfectly here. And you can see that, you know, Hercules is kind of looking off into the heavens, and here we have Eric Masterson. So let's explain a little bit about Eric Masterson. Eric Masterson is actually the alter ego of Thor. He is a regular human, and he's bonded with this Norse god of Thor. So anytime he taps his cane against the ground, he becomes the Mighty Thor. Okay? And I know it's a very crazy concept. I remember reading this back then and, you know, kind of enjoying the story. But as an adult, when I look back at some of these old issues of Thor, I just think, man, Thor really screwed up this man's life, because this guy is, you know, he's an architect. He's a very well-known architect. He kind of has his own personal life. He's a single father. But the fact that he's a superhero, not even just any superhero, but the Mighty Thor and all the adventures he has to get into, it takes away from his personal life, and it really screws it up. So, you know, as an adult, I kind of look at this guy being Thor's alter ego a lot differently than I did as a kid. As a kid, I thought it was cool. Like, man, I would love to have a magic stick that I can hit against the ground and become a god. But as an adult, I'm like, I don't know if I want to deal with all this, because this is a mess. So, you know, Hercules is worried about what's coming from the sky. And obviously you can actually see something coming from the stars. And this is where you get this creature here, which is the stalker from space. And, you know, basically he's a space vampire. Okay, a cosmic vampire. And the first people he comes upon are some homeless people in an alleyway. And he winds up grabbing this guy here. And I love how these panels are done. It's like, it's total classic 1950s horror. If you think about maybe even some of those old sci-fi or horror comics, you know, being able to see the shadow of this man being drained by this creature. You see, he zaps him in the eyes and drains him out, and this is all that's left, is this zombie-like husk. Very disturbing, by the way. Let's take a look at that in the revised version, just so you guys can get a great view of how these colors are done and get the full effect of how this looks. Just amazing. I said I really enjoy the colors here, because it has that kind of magenta tone going on here that adds to the scariness and the mystery of it. Okay, this is more of a violent scene, so they made sure to have that red in there, but still kind of more cosmic, because it's not a stark blood red, it's more magenta. And, you know, they have the purples of the character and the stark white of his skin. It works perfectly for this type of scene as far as like being cosmic horror. Wanted to take a look at some of the old ads in these books as well. We talked about this last time. This is one of my favorite ads of all time. Double Dragon, The Revenge, where you got, you know, Billy and Jimmy Lee fighting the gang and trying to save their girl Marion here. But this has always been one of my favorite game covers. Very well illustrated. I need to find out who actually did the illustration. If anyone knows, go ahead and let me know in the comments section. I very much like to hear who did the illustration for this, because this game cover always made me want to play it. And I actually have this game now in my downstairs man cave NES collection. Me and my daughter were playing this last summer and just had a ball playing Double Dragon 2. So I've always enjoyed this ad. I wish we could see the whole thing. It's kind of hard to see here, but they kind of cut it off to show what, the game company and Nintendo and whatnot. So you don't get to see the rest of the gang members and stuff trying to fight the lead twins. But awesome cover. I've always enjoyed Double Dragon The Revenge. I always thought it was a very cool game. The arcade game is a little different from the NES version. In the arcade version, Marion gets killed at the beginning, so that's why it's called The Revenge. And you don't really get to see that. I think in the NES version, they make it look like she was kidnapped and not shot to death. So, once again, great ad. Let's get back to the Mighty Thor 416. Hey guys, if you're someone who likes comics, I got something for you. I got my own comics. Nukkull-Headz. Nukkull-Headz number 1, Nukkull-Headz number 2, and Nukkull-Headz number 3. Okay? So Chris Crazy House does not just do commentary on nostalgic comics. I also make comics. Okay? And these are 3 of my original ones right here. Nukkull-Headz number 1, 2, and 3 that you can buy at my online store. Nukkull-Headz is a story of a little girl named Angie as she goes on an adventure with this pirate group called the Nukkull-Headz as they try to save the land of Dream from the evil realm of Nightmare. Okay, so fun action adventure story. It does center around kids, but it's for the kids out there that like comic books, but also if you're a child at heart, you will enjoy the story. It's a very fun adventure, and you can go get those now at my online store, and I will autograph these books and send them directly to you. So, back to the review. So we follow up with Eric Masterson. He's going through a lot in his mind here between, his buddy Hercules kind of going crazy, but also having to deal with a custody battle with his ex-wife. So he decides to go out and get some fresh air, taps his stick on the ground and becomes the Mighty Thor, and decides to go flying over the city just to hang out for a little bit and clear his mind. And in doing so, he comes in contact with this stalker from space, okay? And, the cops find the dead body that we saw get made earlier, and then he comes in contact with the stalker, and the stalker possesses him. So that's another power that this character has. It's not just, zapping the life out of somebody, but he can actually possess them with his eye beams. And he actually possesses this one cop and causes him to kill his partner. Just kind of cold-blooded, by the way. I kind of felt bad for that cop. But, the stalker is like, F the police. He doesn't care about that. And, right before the cop can do the dirty work and finish the job, a hammer hits him. And he gets hit by the mighty Mjolnir. So Thor steps in, and he's going to fight this creature. And let's take a look at the graphic novel version, because the colors are a little bit more definitive, and you can see what's going on here a lot better. The stalker from space is trying to shoot Thor, and Thor blocks it with Mjolnir. And the stalker becomes intrigued by that. He's starting to get kind of like, okay, these people actually have some weapons that can withstand my powers. Maybe I need to grab that. Hey, go get me that hammer. So he actually transforms into like this 4-armed monster, and Thor has to fight him. Now, I love this panel right here. This panel is beautiful. Like, this is one of my favorite panels in the whole book. Just the fact that it's done mostly in shadow, but you can still kind of see what's going on based on the way the background is kind of blued out. But you got this big hulking creature that the stalker has transformed into, and Thor fighting him. I think that it works really well. The fact that most of the story takes place in nighttime and in alleyways and whatnot adds to the horror element of it, and it's just a fun story altogether. And Thor is usually not a character that you see during nighttime. Mostly he's a character that's put in bright daylight, but this time he's fighting at nighttime. And So the stalker grabs him, tries to hold on to Thor, but Thor is too strong for him, hits him with his enchanted hammer. And this is classic Thor. So for those of you who have seen the Thor movies with Chris Hemsworth, don't be too put off by that, all right? I'm a Thor fan, and I was not the biggest fan of those films. I like the first two more than the last ones. Thor is not a joke, okay? Definitely not in the comic books anyway. He's not meant to be a joke, and I think it's a shame that these writers and people over at Marvel, the MCU, that they made him a joke because they don't know how to properly write fantasy characters like him, okay? So Thor, he bashes the Stalker and knocks him back to normal, and the Stalker is even more intrigued. So you know what? I need that hammer, and I'm going to get that hammer, by the way. So he takes over like a bulldozer type machine and tries to crush Thor with the bulldozer. Very well done action, by the way. And these are very standard panels. This is in the era where people are still using more of a standard look and standard illustration. So this is right before the image guys of the 90s started doing stuff that was a little bit more sexy, I guess you could say. These panels are very standard, very rectangular, square. Everything fits within them. Nothing's kind of busting free from the panels, but it still holds up because the illustrations are so well done. It communicates what's going on. You can see the Thor in pain as he's getting crushed by this bulldozer and all the rocks and whatnot. But he pushes through and pushes out of there and goes back to get his hammer. And the Stalker grabs him and tries to freeze his arm. But even so, Thor shakes that off. And he tries to grab the Stalker, but the Stalker turns into mist and then disappears again. So that's where we leave off with that part of the story. And Eric Masterson, becomes Eric Masterson again. I always thought this was interesting of how Hercules is kind of just chilling there on the couch. We're reestablishing that, this guy, Hercules, is kind of living at Eric's house. And he has issues with his kid, trying to get his kid to go to school and stuff. And this is his assistant, Susan, who's been helping him out, helping him with his son, but also just helping him out with his architecture business. They have a little bit of a story here where, we're still getting into Eric's personal life as being an architect and being an artist and having to, meet with some, a lady that he likes and an artist that he's going to do work for. But, he sees like a robbery going on, and what he decides to do is he was going to become Thor just to help him, but then the citizens of the city and also the police wind up stopping the crooks first. So he realizes that he doesn't have to do everything. He doesn't always have to do the superhero thing. Maybe he can kind of step back from doing this and just raise his son and concentrate on his business. Now, of course, the Stalker is back, and he wants not just the power that Thor has, so he decides to go upstairs and says, I can feel there's some sort of energy here. And he comes up into the apartment where Hercules is. Hercules is up on the balcony flexing, styling and profiling, as would be said by, people like Macho Man and Ric Flair. And the Stalker comes upstairs, and he winds up actually possessing Hercules. So he winds up looking into his eyes, and he possesses him. And that's big trouble, because we saw what happened. We saw the setup earlier where the Stalker possessed the policeman. Now he's possessed Hercules, and he's turned Hercules against his friend Eric. And Eric comes in. He doesn't have time to change into Thor. And Hercules yokes him up. And the Stalker has poor Susan yoked up by the throat as well. And, he's like, get rid of this human. So Hercules literally throws Eric out the window. And throws him, like he goes so far, he goes off the railing. He's trying to hold on to the side, trying to reach his stick so he can become Thor and save himself and save his friends. But the stick slips, and he has to jump down and go get it. And he takes the risk of jumping to go get the stick so he can become Thor. And looks like he's falling to his death. And that's where the story ends, on a cliffhanger. Very cool cliffhanger, by the way. And I remember at the time when I bought this book, I read it first and then I let my dad read it. And he was enthused because he's a big Thor fan. My dad is kind of what got me into reading Thor, because my dad is very much into fantasy and mythology. So that's what he got me into Dungeons and Dragons, fantasy books, Frank Frazetta, all that kind of stuff. That's what my dad got me into. So of course he was a fan of the Mighty Thor even when he was a kid, and that's why I started reading it. So he would read the books like after I read them. He would sneak and read them after me, and then we talk about the story afterwards. So that is the cliffhanger for Thor 416. 416, the hero and the horror. And I'll just kind of give you like a little look through of the original book itself. We looked through the graphic novel version more so just because it had brighter colors and it's a lot easier to see on camera. But having this original, it still brings joy to my heart, having all the old ads for old comic book stores, old toys, old video games. And like I said, when I first started doing this and decided to do this for you guys and do this type of review show, this is one of the books I thought about, and mainly because it leads into one of my favorite crossover stories, which is the Black Galaxy saga with Thor. And you know, there is one more story with the Stalker from space that I will be doing after this. And after we do this, we can get into the Black Galaxy saga if that's what you guys want. So if that's what you want, if you're enjoying what you're seeing so far, make sure you go ahead and hit that like button, okay? Hitting the like button doesn't cost you much. Go ahead and strike down that like button like Thor would strike down his stick, and, you know, strike down his hammer, and we can keep on going with, you know, the Mighty Thor and the second part of fighting the Stalker from space, as well as the Black Galaxy saga. So go ahead and hit that like button and go ahead and subscribe to Chris Crazy House, and we will be back with more Comics Crazy.